In the last round of the console wars, we put the controllers head to head, and the Xbox 360 controller came out on top by a slight edge. While both controllers were deemed excellent, the 360 controller proved to be a better fit in the hand, and the overall design was superior compared to the DualShock 3. After the first round, the Xbox 360 leads by a single point, and in the next 5 rounds we'll be taking a close look at the hardware. Everything from design, input and outputs, to central processing units and GPUs. It's all going to be covered in depth, so get ready for 12 rounds of heavyweight game console action. It's LP from Techno Buffalo, and welcome to the Console War Showdown. Now, this is a topic that has to be tied in with price and value. I bought the PlayStation 3 on the European launch date back in the spring of 2006. Man, was I excited. But man oh man, did I die just a little inside when 650 euros left my wallet. That's about $900 US. With the introduction of the PS3 Slim in September 2009, the price has dipped significantly down to approximately $300, both US dollars and euros. The two consoles are now on the same price point, but I think Microsoft still has levers to pull, so I would not be surprised if the Elite's price comes down to $250 if the PS3 starts gaining some ground. So I'm going to be looking at this hardware comparison from the perspective of where we are right now in fall 2009, and the notion of both consoles being at an equal price point. Round 2. SKU Wars. To make this series of videos a bit more complex, both manufacturers have come out with multiple SKUs of their hardware. Not many gamers knew or cared what a SKU was before Microsoft came out with 2 different versions of their Xbox 360 hardware. The term was adopted by the gaming community basically overnight. SKU stands for Stock Keeping Unit. It's a term merchants use to identify unique products in inventory. Obviously, in this case, it refers to unique system configurations. The multiple SKU strategy has brought with it more choices. It's not only a matter of which console to buy, a consumer must now choose between the different variations of the same console. When I bought the PS3, I had 2 SKUs to choose from, the 60GB SKU and the 20GB SKU. The 20GB SKU was €100 cheaper, but it lacked backwards compatibility, flashcard readers, and Wi-Fi. Since the launch of the PS3, there's been 7 different SKUs on the market, some with PS2 backwards compatibility and some lacking. 2 of the SKUs have had flash memory card readers, and the rest have not. Suffice it to say that it's all a bit confusing for the average consumer. But there are benefits to multiple SKUs. During the PlayStation 3 SKU cycle, the size of the processors have been shrunk down from the original 90nm to first 60nm, and now with the Slim to 45nm. The point of shrinking down the size of the CPUs and GPUs is fairly simple. Smaller size equates to less power consumption and heat dissipation, and it's also cheaper to manufacture. So if you're like me and you've gone and bought the original 60GB PS3 back in the day with considerable expense, it will be consuming a third more power and running considerably hotter and noisier than the newer and cheaper SKUs. The Xbox 360 has also had several SKUs over the past years. When I bought the Xbox 360, there were 4 different SKUs on the market, 5 if you include the butt-ugly Halo SKU. I mean, come on, it looked like something you'd find in a ditch. Anyways, 4 SKUs when I bought the Xbox 360, the Arcade, the Pro, and the Elite, and there were also some 20GB premium SKUs still on the market. And looking at Microsoft's long list of SKUs really makes me miss the olden days, where there was only a single system and everyone pretty much had the same device. I'm really not sure if the multi-SKU strategy is the right one, because for the average consumer, things can get a bit confusing. I remember a lot of people were quite pissed off 2 years back when, having just bought the version of the Xbox 360 that lacked the HDMI output, only to find out that the HDMI version was on sale a few weeks later. But there's also been quite a lot of confusion about which versions of the PS3 had backwards compatibility and which did not. In my opinion, the whole SKU business has harmed both brands in the long run. But I kinda do understand the business aspect of multiple SKUs. Adding an HDMI output post-launch will sell more units. Shaving off $100 with the expense of backwards compatibility will sell more units to certain demographics. But it definitely would be nice if the console I buy at a high expense on the launch date would be at least equally as good as the SKU that comes 3 years later with half the price. Now this pisses me off, and I know for a fact that I'm not alone with this. What do you guys think? Luckily, Microsoft and Sony have both tried to cut down on the SKUs. Sony first got rid of the SKUs that lacked Wi-Fi, And Microsoft only recently revealed that it would be losing the Xbox 360 Pro SKU, leaving only two SKUs on the market, the Arcade and the Elite. I'm awarding no points in this round because the multiple SKU approach really doesn't serve anyone's interest. I'm perfectly fine with shrinking down the components, but adding and subtracting features confuses the average consumer and frustrates the loyalist of fans of both manufacturers. Hopefully come next generation of consoles, both manufacturers will develop their concept and hardware long enough not to have to make 10 versions within the console's product cycle. A single SKU approach seems to be working fairly well for a certain other Japanese console, namely the Nintendo Wii. Round 3. Design and external features. The design of game consoles have always been interesting to say at least. No game console is alike, and the Xbox 360 and PS3 are very different looking devices. The original PlayStation 3 is a bit bulkier than the Xbox 360, but obviously the Slim has turned the tables, and the Slim is about the third smaller than its big brother and significantly smaller than the Xbox 360. I'm pretty sure Microsoft isn't planning on an Xbox 360 Slim, but if you're watching this in 2010 with an Xbox 360 Slim in your living room, I take my previous statement back. The PS3 is an expensive looking device, it has sleek curves, and a lot of thought has been put into its unique style. Some may say that it looks like a UFO and some say that it resembles a sandwich grill, but I think the PS3 looks sleek from almost any angle. The Xbox 360 has a sweet and simple design, very minimalistic but classy in its own way. The front of the Xbox 360 has a very distinct look about it, and it has some customizability to it as well. You can buy custom faceplate to suit your personality. A bit of a novelty feature, but it definitely appeals to a certain crowd. While I do like the piano black finish on the PS3, man does it collect some serious dust and fingerprints. But if you don't like the glossy finish, the Slim features a matte finish, which may not be as flashy as the original PlayStation 3, but it gets the job done and looks good in its non-dust collecting and smudging way. I've said it before that chroming is definitely better suited for rims of cars than entertainment devices, but the chroming on the PS3 looks okay. Although take note that the chroming is gone from the cheaper SKUs, including the PS3 Slim. The Xbox 360 has a very uncool feature, which is the huge power supply that can be tricky to hide depending on the placement of your device. I mean, this thing basically looks like a game console in its own accord. Both consoles have a very cool and distinct look about them, and I really can't decide which I prefer more. You know, some days I prefer coffee, and other days I prefer cocoa. That's just the way it goes, but let's check out the external inputs and outputs, which are also connected to the design. The inputs and outputs on both devices have changed between all the different SKUs, so it's impossible to make an entirely accurate comparison between the two systems. But what we have here side by side are the most common models in use today, and most essential features are the same. Beside the disc tray we find a couple of memory unit slots, and underneath them we find a wireless sync button. When I first got the Xbox, I was wondering where the USB ports were, but they're actually down here under the hatch. And the USB ports are a bit tricky to get to because they're quite deep inside there. And having a USB cable attached to the 360 really breaks the clean lines of the device. The 360 features a mechanical button for the DVD tray, which pops up with good haste when you press the button. The tray seems to work nicely even though the Xbox is placed vertically. But the most prominent feature on the front of the Xbox 360 is the power button, which has acquired some notoriety in its own accord, in a slightly negative way over the past few years. It's also a subject that I'll be covering in upcoming rounds. On the front of the PS3 we have 4 USB ports. Well, if you have the newer models, you'll only get 2. But I really haven't used more than 2 USB devices simultaneously, so 2 is probably enough. Under the lid here we have memory card readers for several types of memory cards. It's also a feature that I do not use too often, but it's a decent feature to have if you, for example, store your pictures on the PS3. Unfortunately, this is also a feature excluded from the newer models, including the Slim. Under the optical drive we find 2 touch-sensitive buttons, one for the optical drive itself and one for the power. While the touch-sensitive buttons may be cool, I have a feeling that they've added to the high price tag of the platform. But the Slim has excluded the touch-sensitive buttons and replaced them with simpler and probably cheaper mechanical buttons. On the back of the PS3 we find several inputs and outputs. And starting from the right we find the power cord input, which connects to the internal power supply. There's also a main power button if you don't want to keep your device on standby for some reason. Next we find the analog output, if you're for example using a SCART or component cables, and we also have an optical output for connecting with your amplifier. Here we find the LAN connection, and here we find the HDMI out. The PS3 supports the 1.3 HDMI profile, which has double the bandwidth of earlier HDMI standards. It adds deep color support and includes support for the new HDMI audio standards Dolby Digital Plus and DTS True HD. Of course, most people don't have the higher end amplifiers and TVs to support these formats, but it's good to be future-proof. More about this stuff in the upcoming round that we'll be covering Media Playback. Alrighty, on the back of the 360 we find a power cable input that connects to the massive power supply I showed you earlier. And here we find a USB port, which is a nice feature to have on the back because you may have some devices that you want kept out of sight. And we also find your standard local area network port. While the first SKUs of the Xbox 360 did not have an HDMI output, all of the current models do. The HDMI on the Xbox 360 only support HDMI profile 1.2. There is no optical audio output on the Xbox 360. But there is an optical audio output from the analog cable that's included with the device, which is fine. But a very annoying thing with the Xbox 360 is that you cannot connect the analog cable and the HDMI cable at the same time, which means that if you connect the device with an HDMI cable to your display, you won't be able to connect the optical cable to your amplifier. This sucks quite a bit. Alrighty, the next two features were a bit tricky to categorize, as they're external for the Xbox 360 and internal for the PS3. The hard drive on the Xbox 360 lies on top of the console. It's very easy to remove and replace, so if you have one of the older Xbox 360 SKUs, you can upgrade to, for example, a 120GB hard drive. The only thing holding you back from upgrading will be the $150 price tag. You can also swap out the PS3's hard drive, but you'll need a screwdriver to do it. Luckily, the process is very simple, and you can swap out the PS3's hard drive for any 2.5-inch serial ATA disc. So if you store a lot of games and media content on your hard drive, you can get a 320GB hard drive for under $100. And you can actually speed up your PS3 loading times a bit by installing a 7200 RPM hard drive. As you can see, the hard drive included in my trusty old PS3 is a pretty standard Seagate Barracuda disc. Alrighty, the next feature is internal for the PS3, but is an external add-on for the Xbox 360. Put simply, the PS3 has built-in Wi-Fi, and the Xbox 360 does not. A wireless network adapter is sold separately for around $80, and in my opinion, Wi-Fi is a feature that one expects to be built in these days, so it's a definite negative for the Xbox 360. Heck, even my toaster has a built-in Wi-Fi. It probably comes as no surprise that the PS3 will be taking this round. Both the original PS3 and the Slim are sleek-looking devices that include all the necessary input and outputs. Although some of the features have been excluded from the Slim, it still managed to be the better all-rounded device when it comes down to input and outputs. The round for design and external features go to the PS3 hands down. The match is now tied up with a point for each platform. In the next two rounds, it's time to peek under the external covers and analyze the internal hardware. CPU and GPU are up next. It's time to break these babies open. Catch you later in the next round of the Console Wars. LP signing out.